How you guys doing this evening? Doing good? Good. Have any of you ever had that dream where, like you show up on exam day to class and you realize that you're in the wrong classroom, or like you missed that there was a date change? You've had that dream before? Or you look at the exam and you realize you don't recognize anything on the test. You've had that horror. Or maybe like you're an athlete and you show up to your game and you forgot all your gear and now you can't play in the game. Anybody have that dream? Yeah, a bunch of us. So just so you know, preachers have that dream too. Interestingly enough, I woke up last night in the middle of the night from the preacher's nightmare. Like Haley had just finished the reading of Scripture, and I was still in the back trying to get my mic set up. So I come stumbling up here. I tripped on my way up stage. My mic wasn't working. My manuscript, like my iPad, wouldn't connect to the internet, and so none of my stuff would load. So I didn't know what I was talking about that day. I was like dizzy and confused. And then for some reason, the whole back row was like all my heroes of the faith, all my mentors were back there with their arms crossed. They were so disappointed in me. And so it took like 45 minutes to get my manuscript, and most of you had left by then. And it was a horrible dream. So I'm hoping that tonight goes better than that. That's my whole goal for this evening, that I don't live out that dream tonight. Well, for the last month, we've been in a series called The Teachings of Jesus, where we've been examining some of the most famous parables and lessons that Jesus taught during his time on earth. And so we have talked about Jesus and politics, Jesus and forgiveness, Jesus and obedience, Jesus and the vine. And one of the things that you might have noticed in this series is that Jesus is not the soft hippie character that many of you have been led to believe. Jesus, he has this incredible ability to be gentle and compassionate with those who are downtrodden and hurting, but then he's also blunt and forceful to those who are self-righteous and arrogant. He does both of those at the same time. And in the last 4 weeks, Jesus has given us some wonderful promises and some dire warnings at the same time. So he tells us that God has forgiven us the infinite debt that we owe, but he also tells us that we must forgive all those who have sinned against us. He tells us that his commandments lead to the fullest life possible, but he also tells us that if we don't obey those commandments, we are revealing that we do not know him. He tells us that abiding in him will bring fruit and joy into our lives, and he also says if we don't abide in him, we will be cut off and thrown into the fire. And so all great blessings also come with great consequences. And today's story is no different. Today we will be learning from Jesus about stewardship. Stewardship. That might be an unfamiliar term to some of you, but the concept is very simple. To steward simply means to manage or to oversee something. Stewardship is what happens when someone in authority gives a resource to someone under their authority and expects them to manage it. So for example, if the owner of a restaurant hires a manager to run the day-to-day operations, that manager is expected to steward the restaurant. That's how that would work. It's not the manager's, the restaurant doesn't belong to the manager, but it's the manager's responsibility to steward it, to manage and run the restaurant. And so in Matthew 25, Jesus tells his disciples a story, a parable about how God expects us to steward the gifts that he has given us. And so let's read this whole story together. Haley read the first few verses, but we're going to read the whole story, and then we'll make a few observations. So if you have a Bible, you can turn to Matthew chapter 25. We will start in verse 14. Jesus says, "For it means his second coming, or the return of Jesus, for it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away." So a talent is a denomination of money. It was about 20 years worth of wages. So it's a huge amount of money. It's about $1 million in today's money. It's a lot of money. And the master gives one servant 5 talents, one servant 2 talents, and the other servant just 1 talent. Verse 16, "He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid the master's money." So the first two decide to use their money that the master had given them to make him more money, to invest and make him more money. They doubled their money through good business. And then the third servant decides to just hide the money under his mattress so that he doesn't lose it, so he can give it back to the master when he returns. Verse 19, "Now after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful, means lazy, servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was mine, what was my own, with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have in abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus is the master storyteller, and this parable has some profound lessons for us. And so I want to make 4 observations from this story that can help us understand how Jesus expects us to steward what he has given us. So these 4 observations are in your note sheet here with some blanks that you can fill in. Number 1, first observation from this story, God gives everyone a portion for them to steward. God gives everyone a portion for them to steward. In the story, all 3 servants receive a portion of money, right? One of the beautiful things about humanity as God created us is that every single person has their own unique strengths and abilities and interests. God made every person a little bit different, and everyone has their strengths. And God gives people those strengths with the expectation that they will use them to build his kingdom. God has not given us our abilities and our resources to just squander them or blow them on ourselves. He's given them to us for us to steward. So God gives everyone a portion for them to steward. Second observation, everyone's portion is different, and you are responsible for your own portion. Everybody's portion is different, and you're responsible for your own. In the story, 1 servant received 5 talents, 1 servant received 2 talents, 1 servant received 1. So they all received talents, but they didn't all receive talents equally. Just like I said a minute ago, God made everyone uniquely, and that means everyone has different abilities and different skills in different areas. Not all people are equally gifted in every area. That's a common sense observation, right? Some people are smarter than others. Some people are stronger than others. Some people are taller than others. That's just reality. God is under no obligation to give everyone identical gifts and abilities. God has made everyone equal in value by virtue of the image of God inside them, but different in ability. Okay, I want to make sure you hear me say that. Equal in value, but different in ability. The smarter person is no more valuable than the dumber person, but they are smarter. The taller person is no more valuable than the shorter person, but they are taller. Do you see what I'm saying there? Equal in value, but different in abilities. God has given everyone a different portion. And on Judgment Day, God will hold you accountable for what you did with your portion. Not anybody else's, with your portion. We often spend so much time comparing ourselves with others that we lose sight of the portion that God gave us. Like we can fall off in one ditch and say, oh, if only I was as smart as that person, or as attractive as that person, or as athletic as that person, then I could make things happen. Then I could make a difference. And we let other people's abilities hinder our impact. Or sometimes we bail off into the opposite ditch, where we let other people's impact hinder our abilities. We can think, well, that person doesn't get very much done. That person doesn't accomplish much. That person isn't very disciplined. They're not very hardworking. So I guess it's fine if I'm lazy too. We lower the standard on ourselves because someone around us is a little bit less gifted than we are. And so instead of those two ditches, we should be thinking, God made me who I am. How can I maximize what he has given me? That's the question we should be asking ourselves when we think about stewardship. Stop comparing yourself with other people. If God wanted you to be like them, he would have made you like them. Okay? He could have done that. So he made you like you because he wants you to be like you. Your job is to do everything you can with what God has given you. That's what you'll be held responsible for. Everybody's portion is different, and you'll be held responsible for your own portion. And number 3, if you use your portion to build his kingdom, you will be commended. You will be commended. The first 2 servants, they took the resource that their master gave them and multiplied them. And when the master returned and saw how they had invested his resources, he commended them, right? To the servant with the 10 talents, he says, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." And then to the servant with the 4 talents, he says the exact same thing. Like look at it in Scripture. It's the exact same thing, word for word. That's important to realize. They did that on purpose because the servant that was given 5 talents and the servant that was given 2 talents, they are both praised in the exact same way because they were faithful with what they had. They're faithful with what they had. Remember, God holds us accountable for what we are given. It's not about what you have, it's about how you use what you have. God doesn't care if you get to Judgment Day with 10 talents or 4 talents. He cares what you did with what you have been given. So these 2 servants, they invest the resources to build the master's kingdom, and the master praises them. But not only, I don't know if you caught this, not only does he praise them, he promises them even greater resources in the future. So verse 21, he says, "You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much." And then in verse 29, he says, "For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance." This is an important principle in God's dealing with mankind. Our culture today is totally obsessed with equity, with everybody having an equal share of everything, but God doesn't care at all about equity. He has no regard for equity. In God's world, those who are faithful and productive and effective and fruitful are given more and more and more. And those who are unfaithful, unproductive, ineffective, unfruitful are given less and less and less. We have to come to terms with the fact that God will only give you big resources if you're faithful with small resources. It's the only way you get there. There's a lot of people that want to skip all of the small faithfulness and just jump right into the big things, right? That's a common thing. They protest government policy, but they have a D in their econ class. You know those people? Some of you are those people, maybe. Hopefully not. They want to start their dream business, but they're lazy in their current job. We've met those people. They want to become activists for global causes, but like their bedroom is a disaster. They want a spouse, but they won't do their roommate's dishes. They want to give tons and tons of money to the church and to missions once they get wealthy, but they don't give anything to the church or missions now. If you want to make a huge impact somewhere, it all starts with faithfulness in the little things. In the little things. Whatever portion God has given you right now, your job is to be faithful with that. And when you do, you can trust that God will gradually give you a bigger and bigger portion for you to be faithful with. But if you neglect to be faithful with what you have now, if you only set your eyes on the big picture future thing, you'll find your portion shrinking and shrinking. If you use your portion to build God's kingdom, you will be commended. And number 4, the corollary, if you do not use your portion to build God's kingdom, you will be condemned. If you do not build God's kingdom, you will be condemned. The third servant, he takes his portion, he just sits on it. He doesn't leverage it, he doesn't invest it, he just hides it. And when the master returns, he says, "You wicked and lazy servant." Now, in some ways, that might feel a little bit unfair, right? It's not like the servant went and squandered all the money through partying and gambling and wicked living. All he did is hide the money under his mattress and then give it back to the master when the master returned. So why is the master so mad? That doesn't really seem like that big of a deal. Well, here's why. The master's resources have a purpose. They have a purpose. Those resources existed to build the master's kingdom. They were not just a savings account. If all the master wanted was to get his money back when he came back into town, he could have buried his money himself, right? He could have done the same thing and got his money back. Those resources were given to the servants to build the master's kingdom, to increase his resources. And so, whether the servant squandered the money through reckless living or just hid the money under his mattress, he's still being unfaithful to the master. Whichever way you go, he's still being unfaithful to the master. D.A. Carson, in his book, God With Us, he wrote, "It is not enough for Jesus' followers to, quote, hang in there and wait for the end. They must see themselves as servants who improve what their master entrusts to them. Failure to do so proves they cannot really be valued as disciples at all. And as a result, the master condemns him. You wicked and lazy servant." But that's not all the master says. He also promises him the inverse of what he promised the first two servants. So verse 29, "But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." So just like we saw in observation 3, those who are faithful over little will be given more. Those who are unfaithful over little will have everything taken away. I have no doubt that you can think of people that you know who are frequently in dire circumstances because they make terrible decisions with their resources. That's why their life is constantly tumultuous. They are unfaithful with little, and therefore even that little that they had was taken away from them. There are some people who use the resources God has given them in destructive and selfish ways. So maybe they use their money to get drunk and buy drugs or buy porn or go to strip clubs. Maybe they use their smarts to manipulate and deceive other people. Maybe they use their good looks to woo people into destructive relationships, that kind of thing. But I actually think a vast majority of people, including many of us in this room, we don't necessarily use God's resources in an explicitly wicked way. We just use God's resources to build our own kingdom instead of his. Like we're not using our money to buy drugs. We're using our money to pad our savings account and upgrade our toys and indulge in comforts. We're not using our smarts to manipulate people. We're using our smarts to achieve worldly success and impress other people. We're not using our looks to seduce vulnerable people into destructive relationships, but we are using our looks to draw attention and make people focus on us. So we're not using the resources in an explicitly evil way. We're just using them for ourselves. But here's the convicting part of the story. The unfaithful servant didn't use the resources for evil either. He just used them. He just sat on them. He just used them for himself. His sin was not debauchery or wickedness. His sin was not using the master's resources to build the master's kingdom. And listen, you and I have areas where we are not using the master's resources to build the master's kingdom. We all do. Jesus' message in this parable is that his followers must always be using his resources to build his kingdom. Nothing that you have is yours. I don't know if you know that, but nothing really belongs to you. Everything you have is God's. All your resources, all your skills, all your abilities, all your gifts are from God, and he gave them to you for you to steward. And that means that one day you will stand in front of God and he will ask you, how did you use my gifts to build my kingdom? God's going to ask you that question one day. And if you say on that day, well, I didn't really build your kingdom, but I built my own impressive kingdom, he will respond, you wicked and lazy servant. That will be the response in that day. I told you guys, Jesus is hardcore sometimes, right? God has commanded you and I to use the resources he has given us to build his kingdom. Now, here in a minute, we're going to get really practical about what that actually looks like. I want to help you with some action steps so you can make a plan. But first, let's review these 4 points. Make sure we see the logic flow. So number 1, God gives everyone a portion for them to steward. Number 2, everyone's portion is different, and you are responsible for your own portion. Number 3, if you use your portion to build his kingdom, you will be commended. But if you do not use your portion to build his kingdom, you will be condemned. And so, how can we use our portion, whatever God has given us, to build God's kingdom? Well, for the rest of our time, I want to talk practical application today. So first, you should know what your portion is. What has God given you that you are expected to build his kingdom with? So here are 3 categories for you to think in. These are on your note sheet. 3 categories: time, talent, and treasure. Your time, talent, and your treasure. Your time is your availability. It's your freedom. It's your access. It's your energy that you have to give. Talent is your skills, your passions, your abilities, your interests, anything like that. And then your treasure is your money, your resources, your goods, your supplies, things that you have. Now, God has given every one of us a portion in each of these 3 categories. We all have a certain amount of time and talent and treasure, and God expects each of us to use that portion for his kingdom. And so let's talk through each of these three. In each of these three categories, I want to give you some diagnostic questions that you can ask yourself, and then also some simple, practical, potential action steps that you could consider. So let's talk time first. Here's some questions that you could ask yourself regarding the use of your time. Are you giving time and energy to serve the church? Are you giving time and energy to engage God's mission? And are you prioritizing times of fellowship with other Christians? Are you doing those things? Here are some action steps. If you feel like you need to grow in your stewardship of your time, here are some potential action steps. Number one, join a Sunday service team. Join a Sunday service team. This worship gathering that we have every week only happens because of the sacrificial generosity of people in this church. And unfortunately, for the most part, it's been the same group of people making the sacrifice every week for about 5 years. We have lots of teams that make this environment operate, and all of them would love to add new volunteers that are passionate about that kind of work. So we have a worship team that leads us in worship every week. We have an audio-video team that manages cameras and screens and sound and stuff like that. We have a connections team that greets you at the door and mans the info table and builds these handouts that you get. We have an ambiance team that makes this place look good. They set up the tables and the decorations. We have a childcare team that teaches our kids about Jesus. We have a security team. Caleb's sitting in the back making sure bad guys don't come in right now. You guys don't know that, but he is. We have a security team that monitors threats and keeps us safe. We have a trailer team that drives and delivers all of this gear to and from service every week. And so if you have time that you want to give to serving the church, this is a great place to do it. It's not the only place, but it's a great place. Not only will you learn new skills, like we can teach you how to do anything in here, but you also get to hang out with people from across our church, from different villages, different life groups, different phases of life, for a few hours every week. When I was a freshman in college, I committed to set up speakers and set up sound equipment every Sunday in Resonate Church. And it was through that volunteering that I met many of the godly mentors that went on to shape my college years. So I highly recommend joining one of these teams. If you're interested in serving on one of those teams, you could write that on a connection card and hand it in. You could also just stick around after service for a few minutes and talk to someone who's doing something that you want to learn how to do, and they would love to teach you how to do it and get you plugged into that team. So join a Sunday service team. Second option, you could go with a staff member for campus evangelism. Multiple days a week, my staff team is on campus meeting new students and sharing the gospel, and they would love to bring you along with them. They would love to show you the ropes, to teach you how to do it, to model, to coach you, give you feedback, support you. They would love that. And so if you want to grow in your evangelistic competency, but you don't know where to start, this is a great place to start. You can use your time and your availability to build the kingdom on campus at the University of Montana. If you're interested there, talk to a staff member. They'd get you plugged in. Third action step, prioritize Sunday, village, and discipleship. Sunday worship gathering, village, midweek gathering, and a discipleship group. These environments are specifically designed to help you grow up in your relationship with God, in your relationship with other believers, and then out in your relationships with non-believers. And so one of the best simple ways to steward your time well is to make these a priority. That means that when you look at your weekly calendar, these things are immovable. So instead of thinking, well, if I have all my homework done and there's no good NFL games on and I feel rested and the weather is good, then I'll come to church. Instead of thinking that, you say, God commands me to gather with the saints to worship him. Everything else can fit in. Everything else can move. Everything else can fit around that. So prioritize those environments. And fourth potential action step, seriously consider special opportunities to serve and grow. Seriously consider those things. Many churches, almost every church, has unique opportunities for people to serve a greater cause and grow deeper in their faith. So this could be mission trips, it could be conferences, leadership projects, retreats, things like that. In Resonate, we have tons of these opportunities. We provide lots of these because we've seen how transformative they can be. And so we have a Thanksgiving mission trip going down to Denver in a couple weeks. We have our network-wide Resonate conference coming up in January. We have men's and women's retreats coming up in the spring. We have our Elevate project in the summer that will change your life. So for all of you, but especially you students who have more freedom than you will have for the rest of your life, seriously consider these special opportunities. Seriously think through those things. In just a few years, your lifestyle will change and you will no longer be able to do any of this stuff. So don't let these years go by. You have a unique opportunity. Leverage these years. Take advantage of these special opportunities. So there's a few simple ways that you could use your time to build God's kingdom. Let's move over to talent. Talent. Here's a few questions you could ask yourself. Are you using your unique talents to bless the church and the people around you? Are you cultivating new skills that can be used to build God's kingdom? Are you offering your expertise and your service to people around you? Those are some questions that help you gauge whether you're using your talent well. If you want to grow in your stewardship of talent, here's a few action steps that you could do. First, volunteer to serve somewhere that could use your skills, abilities, and interests. Now, this could be the same Sunday worship service that I was just talking about, or you could find another place to volunteer. You could volunteer in your village, you could volunteer with a nonprofit or an organization in town. It can be anything, but find a place to use your gifts, the gifts that God has given you to serve the church, to serve the kingdom, build his kingdom. So volunteer to serve somewhere. Second, offer your skills to people who may have needs. You guys can do that. In a church this size, there are many unspoken and unmet needs that are out there. And the only way those are going to come forward is if somebody says, hey, does anybody need this? Can anybody benefit from this or that? Offer to serve people with those skills. A few months ago, we had that big windstorm that blew down a bunch of trees and branches and made a mess of the whole place. And the next day, a few guys posted in our Discord, our church Discord channel, and said, hey, we have the day available. We would love to help you clear branches, clear trees out of your yard. We have a pickup truck. We know how to run chainsaws. We are strong 25-year-old men. We would love to serve in that way. And that was a huge blessing to many people who had trees down on their fences and a mess in their yard. That's a great opportunity to serve with your talents and abilities. If you love to cook, offer meals for a village. If you know your way around a car, offer discounted oil changes. If you like to clean, offer cleaning services. If a few of you young ladies decided that you like taking care of kids and you offered free childcare, there are a dozen couples in our church who haven't been on a date in months and would love to take you up on that offer. So use the talents God has given you to bless the people around you. Offer your skills to people who may have needs. And third action step, potentially, pioneer a missional activity in a place that you are passionate about. God has made each of us differently, given us different passions, different interests. That's a good and beautiful thing. You should identify those passions, and instead of waiting for the church to start a ministry in that area, you go start a ministry in that area. I can't tell you how often I talk to somebody about a ministry that Resonate should start, and my response is always the same. How about you go start it, and Resonate will support you and champion you and resource you. We want God's mission carried out by everyone at every level of the church, not just through events put on by the pastor and the staff. That's not how the church is supposed to work. So potentially pioneer a missional activity somewhere that you are passionate about. Those are some ways that you could use your talent to build God's kingdom. And last category, let's talk about treasure. Here are some questions. Are you sacrificially providing your resources for other people to use? You sacrifice your resources for others. Are you giving money to the church and to needs around you? Are you hospitable with your space? How do you use your treasure for God's kingdom? So here's a few action steps. Offer what you have for other people to use. That's pretty simple. Some of you don't have very much, but you have something. Everybody has something. So what has God given you that you can offer for others to use? Do you have a vehicle? Do you have outdoor equipment? Do you have tools? Offer those kinds of things for other people to use. Now, if you're brand new to this, that I'm sure feels scary because you don't know, what if they damage my equipment? What if I don't get it back? What's going to happen? But as you exercise that muscle, you're going to find it easier and easier for you. And it's amazing what that kind of generosity does to the culture of a group when you start sacrificing what you have to bless other people. When I was in college, I've talked about this a little bit before, but I lived in a house full of guys, a ministry house full of guys, and I've mentioned before that we were pretty hardcore. So we had this archway in our house that kind of separated the kitchen and the living room, and whenever somebody new came over to the house, we introduced them to the house rules. So that archway, in big block lettering, it said, "Welcome home," on the archway. And when they walk in, we told them, once you sign your name on that wall with this Sharpie, this is your house. You live here. And here's what that means. You're not allowed to knock on our door anymore. You're not allowed to ask permission to eat food out of our fridge anymore. You're not allowed to ask permission to stay the night anymore. You're not allowed to ask permission to use one of our cars anymore. We had a communal car key rack mounted on the wall. So when you got home from school or work or whatever, you just put your car keys in the communal rack, and then when anybody in the community needed to use a car, you just grab a set of keys out of the rack and go find the car and take off. There were times that I didn't know where my own car was for days at a time because somebody was just out using it somewhere. I'm not recommending this necessarily, just giving you an illustration. And over the 4 years that our house operated in Moscow, over 800 people signed their names on that wall and utilized our house in that way. I think I have a picture of the front and back of that archway. Kind of hard to see there. But 800 signatures on that wall. People who we said, this is your house. Everything we have is yours. And it's crazy what that ritual, that signing your name and giving them the spiel, what it did to create a culture of radical sacrifice and generosity that just infected everything that it touched. You don't have to start with some crazy example. You don't have to start by throwing your car keys out into a pile of people and not knowing where your car is. You can start small. What do you have that you can offer to other people? A second potential action step, start tithing and consider special offerings. Start tithing and consider special offerings. In the Bible, tithing is the practice of giving 10%, that's what a tithe means, 10% of all that you own to the church. And so in the Old Testament, 10% was the required minimum for God's people. And then in the New Testament, Jesus increases the standard and tells them everything you have belongs to God. All of your money, 100%, belongs to God. Now, give freely and generously. And so we believe that biblically, God has commanded us to give at least a tenth of what we earn to the ministry of the church. And then we should regularly consider giving beyond that, giving to special offerings to the church, to a special event, a special project, a need in the community, a mission trip, anything that you feel led to give to. I committed early on in college to give 10% of all the money I'm ever going to make straight to the church. And that was hard in college because I wasn't making hardly any money. I was barely making ends meet to begin with. But that commitment taught me that God comes first in everything that I do. And it taught me that God's always going to provide for me. He's always going to give me what I need. I've been incalculably blessed by God through that commitment to give to the church and to needs around me. If you're curious about special needs that you could give to right now or consider right now, here's a couple things you should know about. First, Elevate is coming up this summer, and everybody who goes to Elevate is going to have to raise support for Elevate. They have to raise some money to get down there. And so if we all committed to be a radically generous church to those students, they could raise most of their money right here in their own church. They wouldn't have to go outside too much to raise more money. So be on the lookout for Elevate support letters in the next few months as students get signed up. Second thing you could give to if you wanted to, since our church is young and is relatively small, our budget can't support paying staff members like out of our general budget. So none of our staff members, myself included, gets paid out of the general budget. We all raise personal financial support for our paychecks. So we all have teams of people who have committed to give monthly for our paychecks every month. And so if you have been particularly blessed by a Resonate staff member, somebody sitting around you, sitting near you, consider joining their monthly support team. That would be an enormous blessing for them, for you to join their support team. So think about those kinds of things, those kinds of special offerings that you can give generously to. And third action step, open up your home to others. Open up your home to others. I know many of you already do a great job at this. I think we have an exceptionally hospitable church culture, but it's good for all of us to consider how we can open up our homes and our spaces to be generous to others. I know many of you probably don't feel like you can do this because you don't have a very good space, like you live in a dorm or a tiny apartment or something like that, but you may not be able to host Village. You can still have somebody over for coffee. You can still have somebody over to hang out in your space. Just the act of letting someone into your space is good for you, and it creates a culture of hospitality, of using your gifts, stewarding your gifts in a helpful way. So there's, I think that's 10 action steps total. They're on the grid on the backside of your piece of paper. I know that's a lot of potential action steps, and so if you look at those and you think, man, I need to grow in every single one of them, you will not do anything with any of them. Okay? You can't set 10 new goals in one day. You're not going to do anything about it. So here's my encouragement to you. Pick one thing in each category. Pick just one thing that you want to grow in each category. Time, talent, treasure. What do I want to grow in these categories? write it down, make a specific plan, and ask God to start to use you and change you to steward your time, talent, and treasure more effectively. God has given each of us time, talent, and treasure, and he expects us to use them to build his kingdom. Now, that idea is hard for many of us because the water that we swim in is thoroughly individualistic and self-centered. So it can be really hard to think about using our stuff to bless other people and the church and the mission. But here's what we need to remember as Christians. All of our generosity, all of our sacrifice is modeled after the greatest generosity and the greatest sacrifice that God showed us by sending his son. When we didn't deserve it, when we had earned exactly the opposite, God sent his son to pay our punishment and achieve our righteousness so that we could be reunited back to him. God made the ultimate sacrifice and showed the ultimate grace so that we could be saved and his kingdom could be established. And now, it's our job to mirror that sacrifice to the world through our own generosity and our own sacrifice. If you don't yet understand or believe in what God has done for us through Jesus, then all of this talk about stewardship is meaningless. None of it matters. You must first repent of your sins and come to Christ and be saved. Then, and only then, can your life become a glorious display of his generosity toward us. And so if that's you today, this is an invitation to come home to Jesus and experience his generous sacrifice. If you have already experienced that sacrifice, if you are a Christian, then the invitation today is for you to model your life after that sacrifice by stewarding your gifts to build God's kingdom. I pray that's the kind of people that we would become. Would you guys pray with me as I close?